We only have a few minutes, and we've only just kind of met as a group. We're going to just try to do a rapid-fire little discussion following up on this. Before I begin, though, I want to ask a question. There's a lot of people out there watching us all over the world, and I know there's a lot of people studying art. And I'm wondering how many people in this audience are art students? Any of the arts? Okay. And the other question I have is, how many people here have been directly affected by displacement, gentrification, or re-squatchification? Okay, and I'm sure there's a lot of people raising their hands that we can't see virtually. So I have two questions for our wonderful panelists, and they can answer both or one or the other. You have to do it in a concise and precise way. But the first is, what advice would you give to a young artist who is concerned or interested in exactly these kind of issues? That's the first question. And the second is, what are your politics about gentrification and displacement in relation to your work? Either one or both. Jennene?
Well, the advice that I would give up-and-coming artists is to develop thick skin and to know what you want. I mean, the concept is that this is not easy, but, you know, we're changing the world. So that's what it's about, and that's how I'd answer that. The concept of gentrification, to me, is a little bit elusive. I think you're going to have casualties, and that's why I think it's important to start thinking more about people and less about things so that we can empower people so that they can start standing up and making choices, make choices, and they're not ousted all the time because they feel hopeless. So those are my comments.
Thank you. John?
We've heard the term gentrification many times when we're just started. My issues is the opposite. It's abandonment. So there are communities like Braddock and others in the Mon Valley, of which we're a part of, where it's abandonment. And if your stated goal was the gentrification rollout and you had deep pockets, you couldn't accomplish that. So there are people that are sometimes confused that we're trying to bring the right people in or you know, what's going on here, when that just couldn't be the case. Everything that I talked about in that mad sprint was into abandoned buildings that were slated to end up in a landfill. 90% of my community is in a landfill. And there are other communities, whether it's Detroit or whether it's Buffalo or whether it's Akron or Dayton, Ohio. There are a lot more of us than there are of the beautiful cities. And then when I was in school, I didn't want to spend my profession making, you know, Portland that much more edgy, you know, and wonderful. So I wanted to go into the antithesis of that, and that for me has always been abandonment and that kind of malignant beauty that is you know, representative of Detroit or my community. Communities that have given so much to the American experience and now require major reinvestment in order to reinvent themselves for the next, you know, 100 years.
Thank you. Anne?
Okay, so with gentrification, I think that it's important to try to clarify what makes it a dirty, you know, pejorative term versus revitalization and neighborhood regeneration. And I see gentrification as three concepts. It's the pace, it's a rapid pace, a dramatic shift in a neighborhood's character, and the perceived or reality of dislocation for existing residents and, to a less talked about extent, small businesses. So just to sort of hold that in the balance, and then we need to be mindful, and I think that this is coming up, you know, already, that communities are very different. New York City dominates the frame, especially in relation to arts-led gentrification, you know, the Soho effect that's right in New York City, but Detroit is not New York City, and so just to be, first of all, mindful of the sort of the spectrum out there, but when you do have these instances, you need to try to unpack and think about, okay, what are the larger macro forces, these generalized real estate pressures? Who are the actors? Who are the actors involved? What about the public policy that's exacerbating this or curbing it? You know, and to really try to dig into all of those factors. So, and I wrote a piece where I get into a lot more detail about this, that there's a link on the section page for this called Artists and Gentrification, Sticky Myths and Slippery Realities. In terms of advice to art students, I would encourage you to try to be transdisciplinary. I think more and more, this work, if you're interested in this work, it's about cross-sector partnerships. So we need folks that are comfortable being fluid, talking to folks in different disciplines and different hats, or finding those people that can play that ombudsman's role and translate. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
Lizzie.
All right, so advice for young artists, make sure you have a way to support yourself. That's it. And be true to your work. And it helps if you can support yourself with a job that's not in the art world, because it can be unstable. As far as gentrification, wow, what don't I have to say about gentrification? It's kind of my favorite topic to rant about. I live in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, and I've lived there for 9 years, almost 10 at this point, and it's a neighborhood that's gentrified so fast in front of my eyes that I kind of can't believe it. And in thinking about the gentrification where I live, it's not just like, oh, people move into a neighborhood because it looks nice and maybe some artists live there and there's a nice cafe. I mean, there's actually like a huge kind of like systematic system. There's a huge system that's like, that pushes gentrification and makes it happen so much faster that I think we need to be aware of. So we have to be aware of our own place in gentrification. Like, I'm a white person who moved into a relatively black neighborhood, for example, so I'm quite aware of what that means. But also, like in researching what was going on in my own neighborhood, there was a lot of corporate real estate companies that came in and bought up a lot of properties and flipped them at very specific moments. And one of them was actually kind of caught steering black families away from that neighborhood into other neighborhoods. So there's like this incredible like understructure that is deeply racist and deeply classist. And I think we have to be aware of how these things operate on neighborhoods, as well as our own role, and do whatever we can do to stop that.
Thank you, Lizzie. Roberto.
Advice to artists, who are going to be doing engagement work: really learn how to listen, build your cultural competence, so that you don't become like I'm going to be nasty here, a graduate from a social practice school who wants to come to the desert and help the poor brown people. It's like, please, get it together. So, and in terms of gentrification, I actually think that when I was talking about the tensions in the desert, it's really a bigger frame of speculation culture versus placemaking culture. So when I drill into belonging, that's to me is the essence of placemaking culture and culture practices. Speculation culture in Arizona is horrible. It produces all that toxic political state. You don't belong because you're brown. We're going to move out these neighborhood folks and do some development. So that's an American dilemma. How can you kind of be an interference is the best I can offer, and just sort of like think about being tactical. I guess that's the word you're supposed to use, right?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I guess the next question would be something about race and placemaking. It seems like that's a common theme throughout all of this. I'm not sure we have any time left, maybe, but yeah, okay. If anybody would like to handle that question, the relationship. Yeah. Okay. All right. Jennene, all right, you're on.
Well, I mean, my gosh, the whole concept and idea, the disparity of funding and the lack of funding in urban and rural areas is just phenomenal to me to experience that. We talk about the Art Place grants. My gosh, 27 years of some kind of placemaking in Heidelberg, And so it's difficult, and I think that what we find ourselves doing is trying to fit into a mold that people says is what's working, and we just stay with it, and we start creating our own models. Okay. Yeah.
I think about race an awful lot because of the racialized area that I work in. I think about it broadly in terms of like how whiteness as a racial frame operates in the cultural policy sector and in the public policy sector. So it's always in the foreground of my thinking. And so do I have the skill set to know how to call it out and name it? I think I did a little bit just a moment ago. So I think we just need to understand the complexity of race. And I'm really lucky that I have cohorts in my world that I talk to and dialogue about it as it changes, as the world becomes more complicated.
Thank you. Yeah, good job. Yeah.
I just wouldn't want to become too preoccupied with race. Braddock is an overwhelmingly African-American community, yet I've been elected for 3 terms looking the way I do. And I don't see it so much as race as I see it so much as, poor. I mean, Braddock doesn't have a section where the doctors and the lawyers live versus the poor folks. We're a very flat community that way. And I just think people want things to get better. That's not a racial thing. That's just
I guess they're entwined, race and
Yes.
class, we just can't. Thank you so much, Jennene, John, Ann, Lizzie, Roberto, thank you. Look them up on the internet.